Since we looked at Mario Lemieux today, I want to look at his team. So this is one of those things that happens during the summer. And again, this isn't on a playlist or anything. It's just, hey, let's talk about the Penguins. And they're a team that's in flux. So because I've already got red on the board and because I got black on the board, I'll use green to signify players that are newer. Just to point out, Jim Rutherford has changed this roster a lot over the last 12 months. And yet, with 1.5 million in cap space, you get the feeling that he may still be looking to make a deal because that blue line that I think was part of the reason why the Islanders swept him. There were a lot of reasons there for that, though. The Islanders were just the better team in that series, but they need to turn things around, right? While Crosby is still, in his prime, and his prime may exist until he's in his 40s at this rate. So with $1.5 million in cap space, let's take a look at how much money these players are making and for how long. Now, having used daily face-off for the lines, because we don't know what the lines are going to be, and their guess is as good as mine. Using cap friendly for the cap dollars, because cap friendly is amazing, and there should be some serious money going to the person who updates all the cap friendly stuff all the time. And definitely there should be thanks given out by those of us who use cap friendly regularly, and I do. So thank you. Now, McCann, he's got 1 year left at $1.25 million. Now, if you believe that Jared McCann is going to stay on that wing, well, he's going to make a lot of money next year. So if you're looking ahead, McCann is going to be moving up, and McCann is one of the newer members of the Penguins. Comes in at the deadline this past year. Now you got Crosby in the middle. He's at $8.7 million for 6 more years. But when he signed that contract, he knew he was going to spend the rest of his career in Pittsburgh. And I know people look at that now and they go, wow, that's a huge bargain. At the time, it really wasn't. But it wasn't the max contract because he wanted to make sure that the Penguins could always put a team on the ice that was a contender. And he didn't want to be in the way of that. Jake Gensel, he's got 5 years now at $6 million per. Pretty good player, that Jake Gensel. And when you look at how much money guys are getting on the free agent market, like, for instance, Skinner, Gensel's worth $6 million. Easy. Galchenyuk. So Galchenyuk gets brought in. He makes $4.9 million. He comes in, and it's a savings on the cap from what they were paying with Kessel, but he seems to have offset that. But Galchenyuk has 1 year left. Now, if he clicks with Malkin, who's making $9.5 million for 3 years, you're looking at Galchenyuk and McCann both being free agents next summer, and potentially both of them looking at raises. In McCann's case, it could be significant. In Galchenyuk's, it depends on whether or not he gets to that 30-goal level playing on this line. Now, Cahoon shows us being second line. It might end up being Hornquist. Cahoon is $925K for 1 more year. He, of course, came over very recently, so he's an addition as well. So that's 3 of the first 6 players I've mentioned who've been added either at the deadline or since the end of the season. So Pittsburgh is definitely changing. Simone, I like Simone. He had some inconsistency this past season. He's very young. $750K for another year. So in the case that either McCann or Galchenyuk struggles, Simone moves up. Simone might end up being a guy who gets paid a big salary next year. Bukestad, who was brought in at the deadline, $4.1 million for 2 more years. Honestly, I've always thought Bukestad, that price tag's a little bit high. Hornquist, $5.3 million for 4 years. That's a contract that they might be looking at moving out. Hornquist didn't play up to it this past season. Sure, he could bounce back, but he's in his 30s, and the odds of bouncing back drops every year. The one that really surprised everybody on July 1st, Brandon Tanev. We may be talking about a Chris Tanev trade at some point, but right now we're talking about Brandon Tanev, his brother. Brandon Tanev, $3.5 million for 6 years. And I love Tanev's game. Loved him in Winnipeg. I think Winnipeg's going to miss him. But he, to me, is not a $3.5 million a year player. That is a bewildering contract, especially when you look at the other wingers. And that's why I think maybe he's envisioned as being a third-line guy, and maybe Rutherford's figuring he's going to move somebody else out and Tanev on the third line. And even then, $3.5 million. 6 years. Restricted free agent in the middle's Teddy Bluger. Aston Reese is also there as a restricted free agent, either or. They don't have the cap space to sign both right now. They legitimately do not have the cap space to sign both. I mean, if both came in at $700K, I would think Aston Reese probably get like 800 or 900. Bluger about 800, but again, they have $1.5 million. So if both took league minimum, that would leave them with $100,000 in cap space, and then they still have Pettersson to sign on the blue line. So let's get to that blue line. Dumoulin, $4.1 million for 4 years. I like Dumoulin. I'm not going to say anything bad about that contract. Chris Letang, I think they've tried to move that contract. I think they haven't been able to come up with some kind of a value on it. $7.25 million over 3 years. Pettersson, as I mentioned, he's a restricted free agent. He came in early enough in the year. I'm not going to put a green star next to him. Schultz, $5.5 million for 1 more year. He could very well end up being a guy who gets moved out, but he didn't have a great season. He's a right, according to the chart anyways, he's on the right side. So if he's a right-handed defenseman, there'll be a demand. But again, at $5.5 million. Jack Johnson, they tried to move. They tried. It was either going to be Johnson or Mata, and that's what was said by Rutherford himself. And Johnson at $3.25 million for 4 years. That's too much money. Eric Goodbranson, have I said thanks Pittsburgh? $4 million for 2 years, and he's your number 6 guy. The fact that they're paying $7.25 million for what appears to be their 5-6 defenseman, if you put Pettersson in the top 4, wow. You've got Riikola here at $850,000 for 1 more year. Zach Trotman at league minimum for 2 years. And Chad Ruhwedel, 2 years at league minimum as well. And I almost think you'd be better off having Ruhwedel in that top 6 and moving that 3.25 or $4 million out and having that much more cap space. Pittsburgh's in some serious trouble with the cap. Because the other problem is Matt Murray. Now, whether you think Matt Murray was a flash in the pan for those 2 years in the playoffs and he's overrated or not, he's going to get a raise on that $3.75 million next summer. DeSmith, $1.25 million for 3 years. And if you're curious, Tristan Jarry is number 3 on the board, $675K. He's a restricted free agent next summer. But next summer, you've got McCann, you've got Galchenyuk, you've got Cahoon, you've got Schultz, you've got Murray. If the cap goes up, and it's projected to perhaps go up maybe $2 million next year, that this being careful and cautious with the cap they did this year, that'll happen again next year, they can't do this. So it's weird that they signed Tanev, because honestly, if they hadn't signed Tanev, and if you put Aston Reese in there instead, and you have $3.5 million in extra cap space, I don't know that the team's downgraded that way. I understand Aston Reese only played 43 games. I know what Tanev brings, but I also know what having that extra $3.5 million in cap space could mean, especially if you were able to find a taker for one of the defensive contracts. Rutherford has got himself in a bit of a bind, because all these green stars, McCann, Galchenyuk, Bjugstad, Cahoon, Tanev, Goodbranson, have they made Pittsburgh better? If the answer is no, the newest Hall of Famer, Jim Rutherford, might have a bit of a challenge on his hands when it comes to getting Pittsburgh over that hump. There's a lot of talk about whether or not Pittsburgh might be the sexy pick to miss the playoffs next year and pick them to drop. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I do think they lose something in losing Kessel, and we can talk about whether or not you gain something by losing the guy who has issues with his work ethic and fights with the coach all the time. But there's definitely an issue with the talent, because you got Crosby, you got Malkin down the middle, you've got Gensel on one wing and Galchenyuk on the other, and then to me you have a lot of question marks outside of that. On the blue line, Letang, when he's healthy, is fantastic. Dumoulin is a bruising defenseman. And then there's a lot of question marks there as well. Matt Murray had an okay year. He had some great points, some weak points. And then in the playoffs, he was kind of average. So that's where Pittsburgh's at. and they don't have the cap space to really go out. So for people who are looking like Marcus Johansson would be great here. Marcus Johansson would fit in great with the Penguins. They don't have the cap space to pick him up. Patrick Maroon might have been a good signing and might have made more sense than Tanev, because Maroon probably comes in at below $3.5 million, and he just won a Stanley Cup as well. So it's that extra Stanley Cup experience, which you could debate whether or not that's important, but it'd be kind of nice to have. And again, for Pittsburgh, it doesn't feel like the signings and the players and the guys are getting picked up by Rutherford. It doesn't feel to me anyways like there's looking forward towards the next year. For instance, Tanner Pearson's traded to Vancouver for Gudbranson. He had to look at that contract for Gudbranson and say, that's too much money. And yet he didn't, and there was no retention by the Canucks, which is what threw even the most ardent Canuck fan off. Are we retaining salary? No. So we saved salary on Pearson. I'm pretty sure Pearson's up this coming summer. So it's strange the way things have gone for Pittsburgh, but maybe he's a mad genius and we're not seeing it. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below regarding the Pittsburgh roster. And I apologize for players who may not be on here because they were signed and they likely are, like Blandisi. These guys are likely to be minor leaguers, bit players. I'm just trying to look at the core and see like who gets moved. Like, do you move a Brian Rust? Rust should not be on the fourth line. I think he's decent enough for third line minutes. The problem then becomes $3.5 million for the next 3 years. I don't know who's going to be biting on that right now. So are they going to wait until after all the free agents go? Let me know what you guys think as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.